the Young Dudes by MsKingBean89, Chapter 144, 7th Year, Choices. Fucking bastard! Oi! Sirius was on his feet at once. It's okay, Remus said, not sure who he was talking to. Sirius, who had leapt into defence mode, or Marlene, sobbing and red-faced and angry. Bastard! She said again, defiantly, rubbing at her eyes. Miss McKinnon! Madame Pomfrey appeared, looking uncharacteristically flustered. I will have you escorted out if you cannot be civil. And you! Marlene turned on her. You said you didn't know anything about it. You said you'd never worked with one before. Don't blame her. Marlene, please, Remus said, sitting down on the bed again, feeling a bit woozy. She was only trying to protect me. How long? Marlene spun around and glared at him again. Since I was 5. Bastard! Marlene, please. She flung a piece of parchment down on the bed. It was a letter, folded up and a bit dog-eared from all the fuss. Remus reached for it with shaking hands. Marlene stood there, stone-faced, waiting for him to read it. He unfolded it and looked down and tried his hardest. Most of the time now, he had no trouble at all reading, but he was still very tired and so nervous that all of a sudden he felt 11 years old again, the letters seeming to shift and change as he tried to make sense of them. Sorry, he shook his head. Sorry, I've got a headache. What does it, Sirius took it from him, and in doing so, placed himself conspicuously between Remus and Marlene. He cleared his throat, frowning a bit. It's from Danny McKinnon. Bloody hell, Mooney, what have you done? Please just tell me what it says, Remus shook his head, leaning forward and cradling his forehead in his hands. He was really getting a headache. Marlene was tapping her foot impatiently, and Madame Pomfrey was still hovering, obviously unsure whether or not to pull rank on this whole situation. Sirius scanned the page, much more comfortable with all the attention. He says, thank you, he said. What? Remus looked up, squinting. Well, that's the gist, Sirius replied, still reading. He received the letter when he arrived home this morning from one of Marlene's friends, who claims to be a werewolf. It had a lot of useful advice, and he'd like to meet you. He says he won't tell anybody, and he has no idea who you are anyway. But I do, Marlene said. She had stopped crying now, and her voice was a bit calmer, but Remus could feel the heat of emotion radiating from her. Yes, Remus nodded, his neck stiff. I knew you'd work it out. And you sent the letter anyway? She faltered for a moment. I wanted to help, he shrugged. There was a long pause. Remus would have liked to lie down, but he felt that it wouldn't be well received. Dumbledore knows? And McGonagall? Marlene was speaking much more quietly now, as if she could hardly believe it. Yes. It's so dangerous, she whispered. You could have killed someone. No, Sirius said, hands on his hips. It's all been perfectly safe, ever since first year, hasn't it, Poppy? Remus would never hurt anyone. Remus wouldn't, Marlene met his eyes, but the wolf might. I haven't, Remus felt the need to confirm. We've done everything possible. Are you registered? She snapped. Well, almost everything possible, he conceded. And you just wanted to help Danny? You weren't trying to, I don't know, get him on your side? What side are you talking about, McKinnon? Sirius stepped forward, threateningly. Mooney's on our side. He's your friend. I thought he was, Marlene replied. She wasn't afraid of Sirius. She could best him on the Quidditch pitch any day, and Madame Pomfrey was standing right there. I had to keep it secret, Marlene, Remus pleaded, the tension too unbearable. I had to, otherwise I could never have come to Hogwarts at all. You know what it's like when there's something different about you. You know what people are like. He met her eye as he said this, and saw her turn cold with fear as it dawned on her exactly what he was alluding to. "How dare you?" she said. "How dare you?" "No, I didn't mean—" He held his hands up, but it was too late. "Stay away from my family," she snapped, before turning on her heel and storming away in much the same way as she arrived. Remus exhaled. He didn't really feel afraid, though he had no idea what Marlene planned to do next. He wondered vaguely if he could do his nude exams by correspondence, or if the Potters would let him stay at theirs without James or Sirius being there. But his head was too much of a muddle to make a proper plan, and he thought he'd rather just get some sleep while he could. He lay back down on the bed, Madame Pomfrey and Sirius watching him. "I'm okay," he said. "Honestly, just go and have a little rest." "I'm going to speak to Professor McGonagall at once," Madame Pomfrey said, finally. "I think," Remus said, sleepily, closing his eyes, "you might be better off talking to Marlene, once she's calmed down. She respects your opinion. Don't get her in trouble. She hasn't done anything wrong." Madame Pomfrey gave him a very soft look then, and came over to smooth his bedsheets a bit, touching his hand gently before leaving. "Hasn't done anything wrong," Sirius muttered, scuffing his feet against the flagstone floor. "She's been a bigoted little cow." "It's not an uncommon point of view," Remus sighed. "I might as well get used to it sometime." "I ought to go in." "No," Remus said, sharply. "Leave her alone." "But she's going to—" "She's going to talk to her friends first," Remus said, firmly. "Lily and Mary. I'd rather she talk to them. They're the best people in this situation," he yawned. "Bloody hell, Mooney," Sirius shook his head. "How can you be so calm?" "I'm knackered," Remus replied, and it was the last thing he said for hours. The thing was, whichever way it went, Remus couldn't see much of a future for himself at Hogwarts anyway. He was grateful, obviously, for everything Dumbledore, McGonagall and Madame Pomfrey had done for him. He'd loved every one of his subjects, except potions maybe, and above all, he had a group of friends who were dearer to him than any family ever would be. But the good things would stay good if he had to go. He might have more time to spend with Hope, more time to dedicate to winning this terrible war. Remus was no longer really learning anything at school that he hadn't already got from books. He yearned for practical experience. He wanted to be truly tested. You didn't need newts for that, just a well-stocked library and enough nerve. Remus had everything he needed now to do the thing he had wanted to do almost all his life. If Marlene got him dismissed from school, then Remus was finally free to seek out Greyback. The idea had been ticking away ever since he learnt the werewolf's name. And the night he'd written to Danny, everything seemed very clear. It was the thing he was born to do, almost as if he had inherited the task from Lyle. Gawky, insignificant, second-class Remus Lupin was never going to bring down anyone so insidiously terrible and all-powerful as Lord Voldemort. But the wolf in him knew he might have a chance at Fenrir Greyback. Remus knew it might kill him, but he was bloody well going to do some damage first. He'd said nothing to Sirius about this. As far as they'd come together, Remus was deeply ashamed of his own desire for revenge, his inability to tame that reckless rage. Sirius looked to him for self-control, for a reasonable, measured response, and Remus wasn't about to shatter that illusion and risk ruining everything that worked about their dynamic. Anyway, Remus was 18 now, and Muggle or Wizard, he could make choices for himself, no matter how dangerous. And if it took upsetting Marlene to kick everything off, then at least he'd been able to help a brother in some small way. One of Matron's fatalistic catchphrases popped up in his head then. No good deed goes unpunished. Though what good deeds Matron had ever done, he didn't know. It was dinner time when he woke for the second time that day. Sirius wasn't there anymore, but the Marauder's map was tucked under Remus's pillow. He withdrew it and saw that the Marauders were all in the common room, Mary and Lily close by. There was a chicken pie on a plate by his bedside, magically kept warm somehow. Remus hadn't worked it out yet. Maybe a charm on the plate. He decided he would eat before anything else, and he did so in silence, thinking at a mile a minute, as if his brain was making up for all the time he'd wasted sleeping. He scanned the map for Marlene. She was in the girls' dorm, with Yaz. He didn't know if that was good or bad. No angry mobs had come by brandishing pitchforks yet, which was probably a good sign. Madame Pomfrey came over just as he was finishing his second slice of millionaire shortbread. The thick, oozy caramel was very comforting. "How are you feeling, dear?" she asked, deep frown lines in her face. "Fine," he said, brightly. He held out the plate to her. "Want one? I'll never eat them all." This was a lie, and they both knew it, but Madame Pomfrey was polite enough to go along with him. "Well, as there's no one else on the wall today," she smiled, sitting in the chair beside him and accepting a sweet. She conjured up 2 saucers and then poured steaming hot tea from her wand. It was all very pleasant, but Remus could feel a big talk coming on. "I'll go after this," he said. "Get out of your hair." "You're never any trouble, Remus," she replied kindly, blowing on a tea to cool it, "even when you were a little boy." "I was a right little git in first year," Remus countered. She smiled and shook her head. "Not at all. A diamond in the rough." "Oh," he said, feeling himself eat up. Anyone else, he'd have told to shut up or piss off, but he would never, ever have a rude word to say to Madame Pomfrey. "It's flown by, the last few years," she said. "I remember that little scrap of a thing you were, all eyes and elbows. You've grown into a fine young man." He wished you'd stop, as nice as it was. He didn't know what to do with it. "And you deserve every success, Remus. Do you hear me?" she continued. "It's not going to be easy for you after school, and I know you know that." He nodded. "I'll be okay." "You will," she smiled, her eyes brightening with tears. "And if you ever need anything, you know where to reach me. Of course." "I knew Danny McKinnon, you know," she said, clearing her throat. Here it comes, Remus thought. But she'd cunningly overpowered him with all that nice stuff, and he just had to grit his teeth and listen now. "Yeah?" he said, casually, taking another slice of cake. "Yes, when he was a student here. Had him in here 100 times for patching up. He was a Gryffindor beater, like Marlene. He was a bit more outgoing than she is." "I dunno," Remus returned, dryly. "She's hardly a shrinking violet." Madame Pomfrey smirked, despite herself. "No, quite. She has that McKinnon tenacity, and that keen sense of right and wrong." "She does," he sighed. "He'd always liked that about Marlene, a straightforwardness. And I know what you're going to say, that everything isn't that simple, that there are shades of grey, and that it doesn't matter what people think of you, it matters what you do. Well, yes, I know all that, and it's fine. I knew all that when I wrote to Danny, and I even knew how Marlene would react. But in the end, it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was helping him." "I'm proud of you, Remus." That threw him for a loop. His throat constricted, and he almost choked trying to swallow the last of his slice, the sugar turning to acid on its way down. He spluttered and coughed, reaching for tea to wash it down. Madame Pomfrey got up, smiling. She patted him on the shoulder as he recovered. "I'll let you get on." He took a few moments to compose himself before getting up. He brushed the crumbs from the sheets and made his bed, though he knew he didn't really need to. The rest of the sweets he wrapped up into some parchment and carefully slid the package into his bag. He might need them later. Remus was almost surprised by how calm he felt. There was a sense of closing, a coming to an inevitable end. Someone was always going to find out, he told himself. He'd have been an idiot to think they could all hide such a big thing forever. They'd done a bloody good job, but it had been all luck, and they'd taken so many risks. At least this way, it had been Remus's choice. He'd controlled it as much as he could. This way, the marauders were safe too. No one would know what they'd been up to every full moon. He'd made his way slowly back to Gryffindor Tower. He was all stiff from sleeping all day, and was grateful for the opportunity to stretch his legs in privacy. Sirius hadn't mentioned the hip problem for a while, but Remus saw him purse his lips or frown whenever he noticed Remus limping or rubbing his side. "Lava skate," he said to the fat lady, who barely looked up from filing her fingernails to let him through. He entered the room and felt 6 pairs of eyes on him at once. Steeling himself and pasting on a careless smile, he approached his friends, sitting in their usual place, taking up 2 sofas and an armchair. "Mooney!" Sirius got up from where he'd been sprawling to make room. "I was just going to come up and see if you were awake." "I'm awake," he said, redundantly, taking his seat. "Sirius told us what you did," Peter said, as if he couldn't contain himself. He was fiddling with a chess piece. There was a game going on, but Remus couldn't tell who Peter was playing. "Good," Remus nodded. Anyone spoken to Marlene?" "We got yelled at," Mary sighed, indicating herself and Lily. I think she's mostly hurt that she was the last to find out. She's not said much else, though. Been locked away with Yaz. Right. Listen, Mooney. James leaned over, eyes very serious. We've been talking. And remember 5th year? Dumbledore stopped Snape from telling everyone. He can stop Marlene too, if it comes to that. He might, Remus nodded, though he wasn't so sure. He might serve Dumbledore better out of school now than he could have at 16, especially considering the contacts Remus had already made. But leave him out of it for now, okay? Why did you do it? Peter asked, still clutching the chess piece. To help Danny, Remus replied, surprised. He looked at all of them. He was alone. No one was helping him. Marlene told me that herself. But Remus, Lily said, you knew how she would feel about it. You knew she wouldn't understand. I knew that, but it was for Danny, Remus repeated, firmly. They all promised to give it time and see what Marlene decided to do next. Lily and Mary vowed that they would do everything they could that night in their dorm. They would explain, try to convince her. Remus thanked them because he knew how much they cared about him. They had a quiet evening. Remus played chess with Peter and lost. Then Sirius took over and they tied. James and Lily quizzed each other on potions ingredients, and Mary half-heartedly worked on job applications. Half boring Muggle secretarial stuff to please Mum, and half boring Ministry of Magic stuff to please McGonagall, she sighed. Eventually, they went to bed one by one, and though Remus had barely been awake for 3 hours that day, he climbed the stairs yawning. Sirius had been very patient. He hadn't said so much as a word yet, and Remus knew how difficult that must be for him. So when they were finally in bed, and as alone as they could ever be at Hogwarts, he lay quietly on his back and stared up at the velvet hangings and let Sirius speak. I won't let her do this, Sirius whispered into his ear, reaching for his hand. I'll talk to her. Mary and Lily will talk to her, and we'll make her understand. McGonagall, Madame Pomfrey, they'll want to help you. She'll listen to them if she won't listen to her friends. Or Dumbledore. James could kick her off the team. Anything. We won't lose you, Mooney. You've worked too hard. You're not getting kicked out just for trying to be nice to that ungrateful, stuck-up, intolerant... It's going to be okay, Padfoot, Remus said. Exactly, Sirius nodded, his hair rustling against the pillow. Exactly, because we're going to stop her. No, I mean, it doesn't matter what happens. It's going to be okay. If I leave in 3 months, or if I have to go tomorrow, everything will still be okay. But you're Newt! Well, I was looking forward to completely destroying you in history and charms. And arithmancy. I've been copying off you all year. And arithmancy, Remus laughed. But, well, the Newts don't mean much. I still won't be able to enter any of the ministry training programs without registering as a werewolf, and I'm not going to do that. Not ever. I don't know if I even really want to do that sort of job. What I want is to start changing things. That's why I wrote to Danny in the first place. You mean you want to get kicked out? I don't think it will come to that. I don't think Marlene would, even if she's angry. But she might ask me to leave. And if that's what she wants, then I will. Enjoying the war, Sirius finished. His voice sounded strange. Not bad, but Remus knew he understood. Yes, I suppose you could put it that way, Remus nodded. I'll come with you then. I don't need Newts either. I'm a black. I wouldn't ask you to do that. I know, but I will. We'll go together. Remus didn't want to admit it, but he was quietly thrilled. Perhaps it was the Gryffindor part of him, but leaving childhood behind and rushing headfirst into the unknown with his best friend sounded so gloriously tempting. It would be the making of them, away from Hogwarts and the schedules and all the silly little feuds and rivalries there. They'd had so much to offer, he knew it. Hadn't they triumphed in everything they'd ever attempted? Weren't they the heroes of every story so far? It would be nothing at all to them. They could end this war and really begin their lives. Thank you. He rolled over to kiss Sirius. He kissed his lips, and his hand slid under the nightshirt, and he kept kissing him. His lips, his neck, his jaw. Thank you, thank you.